Hi everyone, welcome back to the Zicast. I'm your host Ryan Ziaks, and today I'm joined by film producer Charlie Norton.
Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm currently in my car right now because I am traveling for work. But thank you so much, Ryan, for having me. I'm super excited.
Yeah, and I'm super excited to have you, Charlie. So, if you don't mind, so on the show, I interview people, get to know them better, and I'm hyped to learn more about you. So, how about you kick things off by telling us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a filmmaker, director, producer, originally from Bridgewater, Massachusetts.
Mhm.
I currently reside in Boston, but I also spend a lot of time in New York. So I work on the East Coast primarily,
Mhm.
and then do some work on the West Coast. I target films that specify men's mental health in general, as well as coming of age. I've currently have produced about God, how many projects at this point? But I mostly delve into the narrative world and the commercial world, and yeah, I just like helping get indie stories, untold voices being heard, and telling great stories. Film has been a passion of mine since I was very young, and being able to not only help people get their stories made, but also help craft those same stories and get those untold voices heard. It's a passion of mine.
And your journey in film has taken you places like to the Cannes Film Festival where we actually met, and we have made this
Exactly.
connection.
It's so funny. I have to ask you, Ryan, do you remember like where we met? Was it at Ampav or was it like at one of those like networking places? Because I know we've like butt heads at so many places while we were at Cannes, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Do you remember actually? Because I'm curious.
Yeah. It was actually, for those who don't know, it was the American Pavilion, which was kind of like a networking place at the Cannes Film Festival in France for American filmmakers. So that's where we were able to meet up, make a connection, and then follow up on it here, Charlie. So now,
Yeah,
and we'll talk
absolutely.
about Cannes a little later on, but to kind of jump into our topics, I'm curious, Charlie, what led you into producing and some of the projects you worked on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I started off directing. I've directed a couple shorts. I'm currently
Mhm.
developing a feature right now.
Mhm.
But I think what's funny, what led me into producing was honestly making my last film.
Mhm.
My last film, The Lost Weekend, which is about a group of kids who go to Cape Cod, Massachusetts for a long weekend in the summer of 2004. And we follow this kid, James, trying to figure out what it means to be a man under, toxic masculinity influence in like the 2000s, where like American Pie and like all these like crazy, like not another teen movie, like influenced like pop culture and what teenagers should be doing in high school.
Mhm.
I when I was really deep into that process, like I had to put in a lot of resource and time into making, have my vision come to life. And I not that if the fact of creative control, but the more, there's a right way of getting a film made, but there's also, there sometimes the untraditional, unconventional way of getting stuff made is, you have to like, trust the process and go in and
Mhm.
experiment it for yourself. So I feel like producing, it started off with not only making my own film, but like just kind of going through the process and seeing results succeed, if that makes sense. I
Mhm.
was like, okay, like just knowing that formula of success. And our film played at about 30 film festivals, one of them being Kevin Smith's Smodcastle Film Festival and the Beverly Hills Film Festival. And it did play at Cannes, not in the American Pavilion Emerging Filmmaker Showcase, but they did a next gen in-house showcase. It was like right at the end of the festival. That's when they screened films for American Pavilion participants, and we got to have some people come in and get press, and just be able to have the same filmmaker experience like a lot of other filmmakers were there in the first place.
Mhm.
So from there, producing just kind of landed on my lap. Like I feel like a lot of filmmakers I met in the festival circuit, I connect with a lot of good people, and they had some great stories I wanted to be a part of, or projects I've always wanted to work on, but I just have never found the right opportunity to direct myself or to be involved in a more higher way, more or less, because I also freelance and my to pay my bills on set. So I like, for example, there was a project I worked on that was a hockey show called Full Ride with Pat Shea. And that landed just by meeting him on set. I met him on an indie set, and he knew my some of my films that played in festivals in the Boston area.
Mhm.
And we both clicked, and he told me about his series that he was making for, like a low budget, but I loved the concept so much. And I played hockey growing up, so that was like a big thing that attracted me, and just kind of meeting other filmmakers and just hearing your stories and hearing your perspective, and finding projects that I guess that felt right for me to be a part of. Even if I wasn't in a director's chair, I wanted to help out in the producer's chair and, help them get their stories made and, pushed out to people who want to see it, and, it just kept me in a good collaborative process with other filmmakers and, you know, always helping people out. So it kind of just landed naturally in its own way.
What was it like seeing a film of yours screened at so many festivals and at Cannes?
It feels bittersweet because we just wrapped
Mhm,
up the festival run for the last weekend at Cannes. It was my thesis from Hofstra University when I was an undergrad.
mhm,
And, I was toying on this experience I had when I was 18, right before college, where, like a group of us had a Cape house for a weekend. I spent all my summers on Cape Cod. And, I've had a lot of fond memories, a lot of fun, youthful experiences there. And when I was, I feel like I grew up in hockey culture. I grew up in locker room banter. And,
mhm,
like I feel like the people I was around in my youth definitely matured faster than I did in some ways. And, like people were always putting this pressure of like, if you don't do this by a certain age, if, the idea of peer pressure, like if you don't drink, smoke, have sex, like all that stuff, like, so you're not considered a man.
mhm,
And I'm like, well, what really defines a man?
mhm,
And especially how toxic masculinity has really evolved in the last 20 years and how we're now recognizing it and we're seeing it as a problem and like how men could treat other men better and not only in society but to one another like it's something that I feel like I grew up on and
mhm,
maybe it was influenced on maybe from like the pop culture that was happening at the time and the movies that were coming out. And I
mhm,
feel like the expectation society brings on upon men of becoming of age.
mhm,
So, I feel like with the Cape, it's a very I think it's a magical place
mhm,
in its own right to tell a
mhm,
summer story. And just having those experiences growing up there and having, memories that kind of stuck with me
mhm,
like going into college and after I guess hitting off those check boxes when you're at that age and you're like, well, what the hell do I do now?
mhm,
There was always that, well, what now moment, and I felt like it was always on my mind throughout college. I decided to write it because I feel like it did affect me.
mhm,
I was always had this mentality of like you had to be tough. You had to, keep your head high. You had to be and dress a certain way and act a certain way to get people to notice you and to
mhm,
get what you want. And it always starts with the saying of, if your friends were to jump off a bridge, would you? And that's how the movie opens,
mhm,
like it opens with them going bridge jumping and James doesn't jump, but he sees what's afar, like is he going to go into peer pressure and tempt himself? Or is he going to go be his own man and, follow the stream of adulthood in the way he's supposed to? So,
mhm,
I felt like it was a lot of reflecting in college and it ended up being my thesis. And, like I had people who didn't really believe in the story. And, I had to go find people that helped, that trusted me and trusted the vision and trusted, people I could work with and, go out and, prove myself wrong in some way. I felt like that was a big hurdle because, it's a hard story to tackle.
mhm,
And I'm just really grateful of the success it had. I'm just grateful that so many people got to see it in its 2-year run
mhm,
and having meaningful conversations about like, how can we overcome, something like toxic masculinity and treat people better, but also like how can we be vulnerable with one another and, look after our, our best interest in our mental health.
And I'm also curious, I watched another one of your films, Graffiti, which of
Oh
course
wow, yeah.
covers mental health, and that's something that kind of fascinated me. I was wanted to ask you about that if you don't mind telling us a bit about that film.
Oh my God. Wow. I haven't heard graffiti come up on an interview in so long. It's
Mhm,
just so crazy. But yeah, no, graffiti was another film I did in school. And that was about a high school principal going around trying to conduct an investigation of vandalism in the boys'
mhm,
bathroom. And, going through the whole superintendent, like, the who did, who done it,
mhm,
only to realize, is what's being written on the walls actually true. So,
mhm,
I feel like with that, it's so crazy because I don't want to say I wrote it based off of teachers I didn't like,
mhm,
but I definitely felt like I was always found myself in positions where like your name's always being passed around in rumors or like people are always talking about you, and I feel like for a teacher to having to go up and clean up the mess
mhm,
is always I've always wondered has like crazy like school altercations or like things that really don't matter, like graffiti in the boys' bathroom, and for Dawn to get so offended of him being called a bad teacher and just, dealing with just a bunch of some cruel things that people say in the boys' bathroom, like it's
Mhm.
always interesting going in and you're like, wow, someone said this about this in the stall, and and just seeing what other people's voices are, and it's really taking it to his head,
Mhm.
in a very schizophrenic way, like he's seeing things that feel double. I mean, yeah, I feel like graffiti art and that type of grunge and urban sense of expressing yourself is interesting. I've always been fascinated by you know graffiti art in the stalls. I mean, hell, I
Mhm.
feel like that was partly inspired by this locker room bathroom that used to exist in my high school,
Yeah.
but we called it not a bad name, but there was just like a lot of graffiti art, like really like crazy drawings to say the least. So I felt like I pulled some inspiration just from high school and just remembering like, you know, just the little things that you see in the bathroom and how that, drives too far.
Yeah, I think it's a universal experience having those disgusting boys' bathrooms when you're in high school, when you go in there and you have no clue what you're about to see. And you were able to take something like that, but make this like noir detective drama that's also this kind of manic, kind of dark piece. I thought it was super interesting, and then like you said, plays on mental health. And not to kind of spoil aspects of the film, but I'm curious as to kind of, as just as a someone who watched it and was very compelled by it, what you were trying to say through it.
I feel like with graffiti, some art's left best anonymous, and sometimes you don't want to know the whole truth.
Mm.
And I feel like a lot of that was just from dealing with like not from rumors from high school, but definitely like the whole hearsay, dare say gossip. And I felt like, yeah, I've definitely had to observe a lot of it, both in the student faculty, and also just like any administration of like my high school, but also like just some art is best left unsolved in its own way. And I feel like it's so crazy, like why a principal would you know, put so much energy into something as little as, what someone says on the wall.
Mm.
And I feel like in that manner, it's like, half the time, you don't have to get the words stuck in your own head.
Yeah.
It's always, it was an adaptation of a short story my aunt wrote, and having the privilege of having it really be the first film I felt proud of to make.
Mm.
Like it's an honor. And I felt like, being able to shoot something in that setting and really just dive deep in this dude's head. Like
Yeah.
he's an alcoholic for a reason,
Yeah.
So, but I'm curious what you think too. It's been so long since I've talked about graffiti, so
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of like what I said. It's like this noir drama. I always like when you like when a genre is taken but placed in a lower stake circumstance. So kind of something like you mentioned, like a whodunit detective story, but with a this very deranged principal. And what you're able to do with him, like he looks like the Joker with the very greasy hair. His eyes are so tired, where he has the kind of like the tired marks kind of underneath his eyes, where very visually from the start you can see that he is unwell, and that just kind of carries throughout the film. So I also think that's something to create an interesting character in the short film. You have to do it efficiently, and you were able to do it efficiently by giving the principal this distinct look where right away you could tell something's off, and then that just carries throughout the film.
Right, absolutely. And having the privilege to work with Matt Stana at the time was just amazing. He's a great actor. And, we both were very invested in really doing this character study,
Mhm.
on a principle that really shouldn't be in that power.
Yeah.
And just kind of how power can get mistreated, even as
Mm.
in a low stake environment like school. And
Yeah.
have that, reflect of what's going on now. Like the world gets crazy, even in small district public schools. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, it's definitely something that resonated with me, and I see the through line between the two of your films that we talked about, both kind of angry young men, and then even how a casual cruelty can be, like
yeah.
the way that Nick is treating James in The Lost Weekend, and then what is being written on the walls, and kind of what we see. It literally the graffiti opens on two teenagers having a fist fight in the bathroom. It's kind of like how kind of just like I mentioned, like a casual kind of these types of acts can be. And of course, kind of I wanted to kind of build on what we've talked about, where of course that you have a strong vision with your film, but you're also a producer, so it's kind of mixing creativity with business, which is film in a nutshell. I'm curious kind of how you balance kind of your filmmaking voice with what you do as a producer.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like I always think big picture no matter what. It's so funny, even with writing, like when you're presented an idea and a story you think sticks. I'm always going to think big picture. It can get into this, it can get into that. It could be this, it could be that. I like to think big picture first, even if it's not there and obtainable, because you want to see the possibilities are endless. But obviously, you have to make those realistic. So, I feel like I always try whenever I'm writing and whenever I'm handing a script, I'm always thinking big picture
Mhm.
until it can't be. And like, and being able to work with what we got. Because again, like, the thing that gets films made is money, and resources and word of mouth and who you know and what you know.
Mhm.
We're really, people that are a part of a production are valuable because of their experience and their assets and how, you can create, you know, magic on the screen is by just that collaboration process. I
Mhm.
feel like with Lost Weekend Graffiti, because I've self-produced those as well.
Mhm.
I've not only had to learn how to work within the means of my budget, but I also had to kind of learn how to adapt things when you can't get something, or when something can't go one way or the other. Like you have to pretty much be adaptable. I think that's like a big thing of being able to not only make your own films but also help produce others. it's
Mhm.
always so it's always working with what you got until you have to get it. It's always interesting to kind of see how productions get made. I mean, like, I feel like with Lost Weekend, the story about how that came together was I had old video games. But we're
Mhm.
talking Atari, Nintendo, like you name it, from like the 70s, 80s, 90s. And I had to make the sacrifice of selling all that just to fund the movie. Like it was like about $20,000 worth of value at the time. And I knew my film was not going to get made unless if I had to sacrifice it. It doesn't matter where that money comes from as long as it finds its way and you spend it correctly,
Mhm.
and getting that made. But not everyone has $20,000 sitting on their lap. You have to pull with what you got and who you know and what you know.
So adaptability, sacrifice, anything else you've learned from producing films?
It's when you're in this, you're in it for the long haul.
Mhm.
We create art for a passion. We this is also a business too,
Mhm.
and sometimes you just can't let your head get into the business. You can't let your passion stop you from achieving what you want. And the logic. It's really decision making and problem solving,
Mhm.
and knowing how to problem solve when things don't go your way, and learning how to get things that work in your favor of getting your movie made. It's a lot of trial and error, I feel, in both in front of the director's chair and the producer's chair. And it's just keeping those connections in your back pocket and keeping those assets close to you, and keeping your friends closer and your collaborators even closer, because it's always the I scratch your back, you scratch mine, especially in this indie world. But once you find your way making points up in bigger productions, it becomes a lot more serious. So it's
Mhm.
always it's keeping your head high and keeping your passion strong, because it's aside from adaptability and logistics and the creativity of it all, it's all there's a there's a whole other side to it.
Mhm. And what's the biggest difference between the director's chair and the producer's chair?
Well, with the director's chair, I can just focus on working with the actors. I can, I'm telling a story.
Mhm.
I'm trying to convey an emotion when I'm a director. I want to be able to work with actors and have them be in this space from A to B, and help them figure out how to get feeling from one thing at the beginning of the scene to the other
Mhm.
without having to, shove certain words down their head, where, you're telling a story, you're making art.
Mhm.
Your end goal with working in a director's chair is to have someone else in the movie theater feel something
Mhm.
by telling your story
Mhm.
and getting your performance and your emotions on the screen. Whereas I feel like with producing, you're doing a lot of unsung hero work.
Mm,
People don't give producers a lot of credit,
mm,
except that, oh, they're the gatekeepers of the money. But there are people there that are helping get your though they're helping getting your film made.
mm,
Like without someone who can keep control of the ship and keep a good check of you know your resources and what you're using to make your film, like your film will go haywire. Things can go wrong.
mm,
I feel like with it's a lot of logistic, it's a lot of overthinking in its own way, but it's also a lot of you have to be smart, making smart business decisions and doing the right thing to help an artist get their film made. It's really steering the ship in its own way. It's less art, it's more logistic, if that
mm.
makes sense, by the numbers.
Or what's something you wish you did differently when you first started out?
You know, that's a really good question. Wow, that's a really good question. Something I would do differently. I feel like I wish I just had more of an opportunity to just make more stuff and to not get in my
Mm,
head with ideas. I
mm,
feel like I'm okay directing and producing two films that I can call my own and a
mm,
feature on the way.
mm,
But, I wish that there were ideas that I haven't even gotten on paper
mm,
that I just did it without really telling me what to do. I feel like you can't let other people stop you from being a creative.
mm,
And you can't let other people tell you what they think is right or wrong. You just got to go do it.
mm,
That's what I hear from a lot of people is like, it doesn't matter. Like, go, if someone is telling you, don't, you can't make your film with me, or, your film is too hard to make. Well, screw it. Go make it. Go make it with what you got and what you can do, and just keep doing it. Like, I wish I could tell myself, go back in time and say, just keep making stuff
mm,
without having those resources, well, having the means of making it. Just go do it. Go try, and it's a trial and error. You're gonna fail so many times, and it's all about getting back up and making the next thing. And you're gonna fail again. You're gonna make the next thing, and it's gonna be even better than what you made the last time. It's
mm.
doing it again and again and again, and staying consistent.
I deeply relate to that because my biggest regret from my time in school is that I wasn't able to make more things like what you just said, where naturally when you're in college you're pulled in so many different directions because, you're in school, but you're also trying to build yourself up as an artist. And that's something I wish I was able to do. So I very much understand what you're saying. And I'm curious, and you mentioned your feature. I've been dying to ask can you tell us anything about your feature?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a fun creative journey with this one because
Mm,
I technically have two
mm,
that I want to get made. One of them is a Lost Weekend feature. I
mm,
want to, when I was going down with the press tour with festivals, like people said it could be a feature. And
mm,
I believe so. We have a script. And, we've been in development for a little bit and we're still, trying to get our ducks in a row with it. But I really want to tell that at some point. And get it made. I feel like the Lost Weekend deserves to be a feature.
mm,
However, I am right now working on this other feature right now, and we're in early like treatment stage for it about post grad.
mm,
What when does post grad really end? What happens when you walk the podium and you go home and you're meeting up with people and you're like, oh my god, like I haven't seen you in so long. What are you up to?
mm,
That feeling of small town life, and,
mm,
and big city life colliding, and in
mm,
a place where people can't really call home anymore.
mm.
So it's definitely dealing with, I feel like I had to live a little life before I can write something else aside from a Lost Weekend feature. Because
Yeah.
for the last few years, that has been honestly the first feature I want to make is the Lost Weekend feature. But there's another story right now that's been catching my eye about post grad.
Mm,
And I feel like right now, especially today, I feel like a lot of young adults
mm,
are feeling this fatigue and this insecurity of living at home and not being able to afford rent outside of renting an apartment, and just where the economy's at. And I feel like
mm,
I want to tell a story about just how post grad kind of sucks. So it's just, I feel like I've been collecting my thoughts. I'm working with one of my longtime creative partners right now, a
mm.
few of them, and we're just trying to get something drafted up. So we're in the early stages for that and hoping to make it for a micro budget, something, nothing crazy.
I was gonna ask if that post-grad film was a horror movie because of just naturally that experience and how tough that is. And I'm curious with The Lost Weekend because, of course, that film is very contained. I'm curious how you plan on adapting it to a feature.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, I feel like it's really exploring the world in Cape Cod. You know, I mean, we explore it's the relationship about these three guys, and
Mm,
they've been together. They've been friends since they were like in grade school. And you know,
mm,
as time evolves, you know, like I feel like sometimes those relationships when you're so young evolve so rapidly fast and we all become different people, like whether we go to college or go into workforce or serve. You know, I feel like a lot of people at 18 are still trying to figure themselves out, but these kids have been together for a long time. And, you know, it's the last summer before they all part ways and, you know, start the rest of their lives. You know,
mm,
I feel like I want to explore more about their relationship and how James, you know, explores the Cape with them and how he is, you know, trying to figure out, you know, what are steps that further define his manhood, aside
mm,
from, you know, what his friends put pressure on and, you know, what society expects and, you know, what it's like looking at the other side, you know? So I feel like I want to explore more, especially in that time period where, you know, toxic masculinity was looked differently upon, but also at the same time, you know, further exploring, you know, a place where I spent a lot of my time. So I feel like exploring more with the relationship of James, Nick, and Dylan. Yeah, Dylan. It's been a second. I want to
yeah.
explore more with those three kids, you know?
And I'm curious if you have any advice for any aspiring directors and producers.
You know, just keep making stuff. Just keep staying consistent, staying creative. You know, I feel like for me, the last couple of years, it's been a little tough. You know, I mean, especially, you know, still being, you know, fresh out of school and, you know, trying to work as you know on as many things as you can and always saying yes and
Mm,
staying consistent. You know, I think consistency is key. You know, keep making stuff, don't let people say no to you. And you know, if you feel if it's right to tell it. You know, like don't let someone say no,
mm,
you know, define your place in this industry because it's a very tough business to, you know, stay afloat in. You know,
mm,
always staying active, reach out to your friends, always check in, always, you know, offer to collaborate, you know, and be, you know, a team player. You know, I think that's like a big thing is, you know, having a good attitude and being a team player on set, even in the collaboration process, you know,
mm.
working, being, you know, open-minded, adaptive, consistent team player, you know, just keep making stuff. Don't let that be the thing that defines you.
To take us back, of course, to Cannes where we met, do you mind telling us how you were able to get to Cannes and what that experience was like?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like it was like right at the tail end of last weekend's festival run. And
Mm,
keep in mind, like I was working on this feature, you know, for it. We were some drafts in, and it came to a point where it was for me like we needed it. I needed a second away from it because I
mm,
felt like it. I was in a position where I wanted to make this project, but I didn't have the right resources yet. And also for me, like, yeah, feature's daunting. You know, I mean, I haven't made one yet, but I also need to see how other people are going and taking their, you know, projects on the market. I think
yeah.
that's what I didn't have is the knowledge on the market and how to properly get your film made through the market, funded through the market, or meeting people who have that money or the people that have the connections to, you know, help you boost your career. I looked at it
Mm,
really as a resume booster. So I
mm,
was like looking at student programs as a post grad because I was like, I know a lot of fellowships and a lot of incentives. There's a lot of opportunity for filmmakers under 25.
mm,
And I was 23 at the time, 24 when I applied. Um, and I wanted to continue opening up those doors for learning. And for me, it was knowing how the market works and knowing how big blockbuster movies and just movies in general go to these markets to get distributed, sold, represented. I had no knowledge in that. So I applied to Cannes through Hofstra. I knew that was where I went for undergrad. And I met some students that went the year prior in 2024.
mm,
And I was like, oh, wow, I wish I could have went when I was an undergrad. Keep in mind, I went to college during COVID. So
yeah.
most of my college experience has been under a mask
Mm.
and quarantine on Zoom. So I'm so used to Zoom interviews. So, yeah. So, I mean, those opportunities didn't really present itself in undergrad. So I needed a boost post grad.
Mm-hmm.
So I applied through AMPAV, and I found out that the loophole was there was no age limit to apply. I didn't even have to be in school. So I just said, well, I'm going to shoot my shot and just say that I'm considering going to masters, and by then I'll have it started and figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
I was still freelancing and working on set and just figuring things out. So I applied and shot my shot, and there was a spot in their Cannes student program. So I worked under the American Pavilion,
Mm-hmm.
and when I was there, I was placed with a distribution company. So I got to learn under Adler and Associates Entertainment, and they work on indie features, worldwide. And I got to learn under their wing, and it was just an amazing experience. I got to really, it opened my eyes on like how those one-on-one meetings go down, those buyer meetings, and those pitch meetings, because they both distributed, but they also like helped self-fund with certain check boxes. Um, so like just being able to learn under their wing and seeing the market at its like running when it was running, like it was great hands-on. So I learned and got a lot of takeaways from that, and also being able to meet a ton of filmmakers from across the world. I'm not even gonna say the US, because that was a global event. Like we were meeting people from different countries, and meeting people from different parts of the US, and really all over the world. I actually just got a postcard from filmmaker I met on the Marche the other day in my mailbox. So that was like, being able to just like connect with so many people globally and really think this global mindset. It was an incredible experience, but it started with a loophole of not having to be a student to apply for the American Pavilion, and then applying for their South by Southwest initiative, which I never went. They just let me go to the Cannes program instead because I traded it off. So it was just finding a way to get there. I only cared just being a Cannes, no matter what the cost was.
So always fighting to get your stuff made, just like you fought to get into Cannes and finding your own way to kind of bring those things back together. And what did going to Cannes, being at the American Pavilion, of course, the Marché, for those who don't know, is the big film market there. What did all that teach you?
One, don't stop creating. I'll tell you that. Always coming prepared. I mean, come prepared with projects. If you're a filmmaker, have finished films ready or scripts and decks ready to go. And tell them that you're looking for producers. Like being prepared, I would say, is the biggest thing I learned, is being ready to go. Because like I felt like I wasn't even ready to go.
Mm,
I didn't have I didn't feel like I had my ducks in a row when I was there. Like I was just if you're a filmmaker and you're looking to get your film made and pitched on the Marche, have your ducks in a row. Like know what your script is, have it locked in. Your pitch deck, your pitch materials, like things people can see and consider lending a hand on. And if it's finished, like showing that product, like coming prepared, whether it's with, hi, my name is so and so, and this is who I am. Like whether that's a portfolio, resume, a website, more so in this case, finished films, coming prepared and bringing something to the table, because that I remember talking to so many different people at those, networking events and at the pavilion, and outside the Marche and in the Marche, and everyone had something to bring to the table. I think what I learned is just having your ducks in a row, bring something to the table for them to see value in you as an artist, as a creative, and as a producer, and as a director. Like just really just coming prepared. It ain't no joke. It's a big festival.
mm,
I was very underwhelmed, and no, underwhelmed is not even the right one. Overwhelmed.
mm.
I was very overwhelmed. So it was just like, just coming in and just being ready, being confident. I think confidence is key. And, when you're not prepared, just, think that you are prepared. All that matters is, getting that network in your back pocket.
And that's really building those producer skills, being prepared, coming in with the right mindset. And do you have any favorite memory, any specific favorite memory from your time at Cannes?
Oh my God, there's so many. Um,
Mm,
well, I mean, at the no, not the Marche. At the Pavilion, I got to sit in on a ton of panels with
mm,
IndieWire, and that was awesome. They were all future filmmaking panels, and I remember getting to sit into the Spike Lee panel for
mm,
Highest to Lowest, and that was awesome. I remember waiting 2 hours in line just to get in front row, and
mm.
I was like super awesome just to hear Spike just talk about filmmaking and just learning from all these different artists. And I'm from Boston.
Mhm.
So we were fresh off of the Knicks beating the Celtics in the playoffs. So he saw my green shirt and noticed that I was from Boston. I was like, "Yep, I unfortunately am." So it was just, but nonetheless, it was awesome just being able to be in the same room as him. And then seeing Richard Linklater and Kevin Smith and all those other a bunch of amazing filmmakers at the pavilion. I got to attend the Golden Globes party that happened there, and they give Paul Mescal an award, and that was awesome. Just being in the same room there and being with a bunch of producers and filmmakers and directors and actors, just being in the same room as the whole industry,
Mhm.
like as a whole, like the industry is there
Mhm.
and it's right in front of you. And it made me just realize like how small it really is if you really think about it. Um, and obviously just seeing the films, having the opportunity to walk that red carpet after seeing it on like Getty and on YouTube and just seeing it all these years, being able to walk the carpet at Cannes and being a part of that, even just being just a small part of a big premiere. Like it's some surreal stuff. Like even for me, like I'm in awe thinking of it. Like I mean, I'm going back this upcoming year. Like I'm super excited just to be there again and to be more prepared and to be and just to know what I'm expecting this time around compared to the first time. Because
Mhm.
I went in
Mhm.
not knowing much before, now knowing what I know now. So I'm super excited to just being able to experience that all over again and to be there and just be with a bunch of just talented people in the best place in the world.
The industry is more accessible than you might think. And like you said, seeing it being that close, having Spike Lee to notice your Celtics shirt, it's it's all real. It's all right in front of you. It's not as far away as it may
But
seem.
I told work, I'm going to this panel. Good luck. But they were very accommodating knowing I wanted to go to that. So I appreciated them letting me out a couple hours early just so I can sit in the rain and
Mhm.
go be in that room for a solid 2 hours or however long that was. But just some crazy life experiences.
100% because a bunch of other people and myself were kind of crowded outside the room, listening in on headphones and watching on the screens of Spike Lee present, and just so much knowledge talking about kind of what you should do when you're at a film school and kind of a lot of aspects of his own career. I was able to meet Richard Linklater as well. I don't know if you went to when a lot of the filmmakers would be walking out to media, there was like that little path and sometimes people would be gathered trying to meet them, and I was able to say hello to Richard Linklater, which was a really, really cool experience. And I'm curious,
That's awesome.
yeah, for anyone who hasn't gone to Canada, how would you describe kind of what it's like there?
It's a circus. That's the best way to describe it. It's like one giant circus for filmmakers, film lovers, and film enthusiasts.
Mhm.
But it's the best place in the world to go meet people who are into film and people who want to make movies and people who want to tell art to the world. It's the place to be if you can find the opportunity to be there.
Because it's this Cannes, France, beautiful place, beautiful weather. Everything, also something I noticed, everything is so walkable when you're there, contrary to
Mhm.
like a lot of places in the States where it's very difficult to get place to place. In Cannes, it's so easy to maneuver, go to all these theaters, go to all these panels, and then just enjoy being in France where there's no bad bread or cheese you can find in the area. And it's really just a perfect experience because I mentioned like I've been to Sundance. It's really cold there in Park City, Utah, but in France, it's the most beautiful weather you can find. It really is like a dream to be there, and especially yourself, you mentioned you were able to screen a film. Can you take us into that?
Oh my God. That landed so randomly on our laps because I feel
Mhm.
like, because like, so AMPAV had the emerging filmmaker showcase. I originally submitted to that. When I did my application, I submitted to that showcase that was sponsored by IndieWire, and that was kind of partnered with the festival, and then American Pavilion, the student program. I didn't get in in the emerging filmmakers, but I did get in to work at the festival. And I said to myself, I don't care how I get to Cannes, as long as I'm there, that's all that matters to me.
Mhm.
And just take it as a learning experience and a life experience, and just to boost my career. But with the screening, I felt like it just came so last minute because they had this like extra day to screen student films there for people who worked at the festival through
Mm,
AMPAP. And I'm like, yeah, like I'm sure I'm not the only one, and there were multiple filmmakers from our program that probably submitted and didn't get in.
mm,
So I remember the one of the programmers there was like, we're gonna do a special screening for the students. It's gonna be in house, and I took that as an opportunity as let's get Lost Weekend screened.
mm,
I want to screen the film, and having the opportunity to say my film played at Cannes
mm,
is an accomplishment of itself. Even if it's, I'm learning now that, there's a lot of programs within Cannes that are sponsored by the festival, but also not sponsored. But
mm,
I think what I've learned is that really, it matters, but at the same time, it doesn't, only because like you're at Cannes.
mm,
You worked at Cannes, your film played at Cannes, and having the opportunity to even present something there. And I got to pitch my film in front of investors at the Marchette. Like I found opportunities through work and through my placement and through AMPAV itself to
mm,
help my short become a feature.
mm.
And it was incredible, like, and just, but having the film to play there, it just felt like the best bittersweet thing to wrap up a crazy festival run, like a crazy 2 year run, but also having those doors open to possibly, meet investors and to meet producers to help me out with my project like that. It's just a once in a lifetime opportunity,
Yeah.
and even post festival, it's benefited so much.
Mm,
And I'm excited to even have the possibility of going back and
mm.
but maybe screen my next film. Who knows?
And you describe the marché kind of as a circus, which is really what it was, because it's basically for those who weren't there, it's just lines and lines of the buyers who want to buy films. Like, would you be able to describe that in any more detail for the audience?
Think of it like a convention.
Mm,
You got a bunch of booths. Companies have their own taste of films. I mean, I remember when we were in the Marché, like we were right across of I think it was a Thailand-based like horror company. Like,
mm,
they did like horror films, horror features. There's always something for everyone, I think. I can, like our company was more all around.
mm,
Like we took everything and anything as long as it was good. But like there's a lot of opportunities for filmmakers to submit their film and to meet people. And I will say it's like one of those things where you kind of have to do your homework and to
mm,
know who's there like a month or two in advance to set up those meetings, because like we had a ton of pre-planned meetings
mm,
that were set up months in advance before the marché. But it's one giant zoo, especially the first couple, the first week. First week is crazy because all the big films are premiering, and all the big buys and sales are happening. And by the second week, it kind of calms down. But
mm,
like, like everything that people do at the festival, it's all being put in the trades, like
mm,
every morning we would always read the trades, read Variety, read Hollywood Reporter,
mm,
and like, see what's buzzing, what's not. Because even everyone is always on the clock and always on cue, even at these after parties.
mm,
And like the marché is always running, even during these conferences. But we were so busy. We had like 15 meetings a day. It was insane.
mm,
We were just talking to all these buyers that were interested in, helping film, buying films and getting them on certain platforms, but also selling. Like everyone had business to do. Like there was not even a spare second to even catch them. It's one of those things. It's like you catch them early, or you try to catch them at a good time, or like they're on the fly. But everyone, it's very busy. They
mm.
said it wasn't as busy as previous years, which I think I get, because I feel like the industry has now been just going through a lot within the last year or so, really since COVID. But it was really nice to see it, like just an amazing opportunity to see it firsthand.
Mm.
But it's always moving. It's all about keeping up with it. That's the hard part.
The process of Can could be a movie in and of itself because of how fast moving and intense it can be to try to sell these films. And I remember, like you mentioning the trades, I remember for my internship, I'd always be going to the marché, grabbing the trades, and then running to my internship to bring it over. We'd have like a whole line of them in the penthouse where we conducted business out of. So this is all just like a fun trip down memory lane. And I'm curious,
Yeah.
you mentioned some of those after parties. Can you tell us what a can after party looks like?
Just imagine like a high school frat party or a college party, but like everyone's dressed up like in like nice tuxes, attire. Like it feels like prom in its
Mm,
own way. It's because in the loose way to put it, it's a bunch of filmmakers that like to drink and talk, you
mm,
know.
mm,
And it's also fun because like I mean you're also gonna see some like crazy people and like crazy stories. Like I felt like I
mm,
always heard like one crazy story every day.
mm,
Um, like the exclusive parties on the beach, or the ones I heard that were on the boats or up in the hills,
mm,
But like they were elegant parties, but there were fancy cocktail mixers, like they were really fun, and it was awesome to go on Variety on their Instagram and seeing all the headshots
mm,
and seeing like I got to go. It was Variety's 120th birthday party. I think that's what the Golden Globes one was. And then like I forget the reason why I was there because they were giving awards out for that point. But it was it was a very elegant cocktail mixer,
mm,
but I also look at it as a bunch of filmmakers that love to talk about one another and drink.
mm,
Still crazy, but I guess in a more professional sense, it was a very elegant, high end party. Like you're with people in the industry of power.
mm,
You're surrounded by all power, money, and wealth,
mm,
and people who are telling art.
mm,
And again, it's one of those instances where it's like the industry's so small.
mm,
It's just amazing to be in the same room with some of these people. I mean, I was intimidated, but
mm.
it was a great opportunity just to be there, just to have a headshot in front of a Variety step and repeat, the Golden Globe step and repeat. It's crazy.
Mm.
But I got to meet some valuable connections out there, and being able to follow up with them, and helping out with my own ventures. But just being in the same room and having the exclusivity of being in those parties is insane. Because it's insane of the high status people you are meeting, like Spike, like Paul, like people I can't even think of at the top of my head, but like everyone that you know in the industry is in that room.
Mm.
And that's the scary part. But it's also the fun part.
They're basically like classy networking events, essentially, kind of were those
Exactly.
parties. And you kind of mentioned a little something of, not to put words in your mouth, but having like a bit of imposter syndrome. How were you able to overcome that, just for anyone listening who could find himself encountering something similar?
Just sound confident. That's all I'll
Mm,
say. It's confidence is key. I feel like with that, it may feel like imposter syndrome only because when you're in your 20s and you're
mm,
with people who've been in the business for 20 plus years,
mm,
that's the intimidating part that feels like imposter syndrome. But you're also it's like going to your first like middle school dance, be yourself,
mm,
like, but I think in that sense, it's also like going to an interview, like, know what you're talking about,
mm,
but also being confident and, and sounding confident is just as important. And don't be afraid to show off what you've done. Cause I feel like when you're networking, it's really about showing off,
mm,
but showing off with class and with, with etiquette.
mm,
I think so. Being yourself, being confident, that's really the best way of putting it. And just know it is going to be overwhelming. It
mm,
is going to be a lot. It's going to feel like a lot, but like you'll get a hang of the ropes once you follow through with the motions. It's also part of why I'm excited to go back again next year.
mm.
Is to to do better than what I did last year.
If you're in the room, you belong in it. It's
Exactly.
is really what I take away from that, and to carry yourself with confidence in that, to kind of, you have to see the person you want to be in your head before you actually are that person. And I'm curious if you have any other takeaways from your time at Cannes, any kind of final reflections on that experience that you're taking with you as a filmmaker.
When I'm going to festivals when I don't have films to present, because again,
Mm,
last weekend screened there by chance, by
mm,
just a last minute thing that came up. But to me, I'm a student by heart.
mm,
I always want to learn. I want to be caught up. I want to, be a student in the industry in its own way. Like
mm,
I'm involved in it. It's what pays my bills.
mm,
I work in it, but I'm also a student at heart, and I want to learn every single day and how I can improve better in my craft and learn from other
mm,
filmmakers and what I can do from hearing their stories and hearing their journey and how I can, follow a similar stepping stone, is always being open to learning, and I will always, if I find the opportunity to go to these festivals every single year, and whether I have a film or not have a film, like I want to go there and I want to learn. I want to learn from other
mm,
filmmakers. I want to learn from other stories. I want to feel things from other stories and other
mm.
films, is always still being a student in the craft.
really building on that post grad idea you have. You never really leave school, so to speak, because like you said, you're always learning.
Whenever I'm not producing, I'm working for other people in producing. Like meaning like I'll still do my assistant to the producer work and I'll do some PA work here and there. But look, the commercial world and like production, like it helps pay my bills. Like I'm an artist first. I make my own movies, but like when it's hard when you have to build a following and you have to build a reputation to make money in this industry. I started off like everyone else. I PA'd. I still PA, but on the commercial world mostly because to be honest, it helps keep keep myself financially afloat. So I've been working with currently the Progressive team for Progressive Flow, which is the longest running national ad in the United States by almost 20 years.
Mhm.
And like they've been building off this world with Flow and her quirky friends trying to sell car insurance with people.
Mhm.
So I've been working with Arnold Worldwide on freelance with Station Film out in Los Angeles, and they've been producing these commercials really since the beginning. So since like 2007 or something.
Mhm.
Like it's been a long, long time, and Flow is still on your TV screens.
Yeah.
So being able to have a professional relationship and to go back every 3 months to work with these guys is incredible. And Stephanie, who plays Flo, is so nice. Like I get to help her out, work on set. It's just a great production environment. Like and I like commercial when you're building worlds with brand and character. And
Mhm.
it's so funny because like I'm trying to kind of learn a little more about this in the corporate side because there is a corporate world for film. It just you have to find it. And part of it is in the commercial sphere because you are dealing with more creative, quote unquote, creative producers in like corporate America and are trying to sell something. Like that's why they're making commercials. But like the Flow character is so interesting only because like you're selling car insurance with this like quirky New England, like fast talking
Mhm.
East Coast mindset. Like she's so knowledgeable and it's kind of scary. But the fact it's been selling for so long. It's being a part of that magic is awesome. And right now I'm currently I still PA, I still do producer assistant PA work like for them. But I want to learn and hopefully get to the coordination side and working my way up and within their ladder, they're still the ones doing the work. So it's just been awesome working with them. This past year, I also worked on I worked on a Spider-Man like fan film, which I never find myself on fan films.
Mhm.
It was called Spider-Man and the Monsters of Manhattan.
Mhm.
And I ended up working on that would end up being the last movie Michael Madsen from Reservoir Dogs was credited on.
Wow.
So before Can, I got to work with Mr. Blonde. And I've had interactions with Michael Madsen. And I'm very grateful for our interaction. I've only met him once in my lifetime, and it'll be the only time I'll ever meet him in my lifetime because he passed away in July. And I'm very grateful. I knew he was going through some stuff. And I was just trying to like, just help him out any way I can. It was just a great experience. I know he's been mostly doing indies, you know,
Mhm.
and he was in this really good movie called Max Dagon with Zachary Gordon.
Mhm.
But I think they just changed the title of this movie to
Mhm.
something, and I forget what it is. But I remember seeing Michael in that movie, and I was like, wow, like he was really good. Like he played a really good antagonist. And then I found out I knew he was in Kill Bill and Reservoir Dogs, but like I didn't realize it was him until I saw him and put a name to a face. But at the time he was going through some stuff, and I get it. He opened up to me about it. And he was going through, a divorce with his wife and dealing with the passing of his son.
Mhm.
And I know he was just just in a rough state. And the production was, it was a little more smaller. So definitely he was a little more antsy. But on that job, I had to kind of keep the peace with them.
Mhm.
Because production's your problem solving, and it was a high stakes moment. A high
Mhm.
stakes moment more so in he was they got him for a low ass rate.
Mhm.
And his agent was even pushing for higher, but I don't know how they did it, but they made him get it for, little to nothing.
Mhm.
And I've dealt with high profile talent in the past and I know what their expectations are. So I kind of know what I'm expecting from him.
Mhm.
But I just needed to make sure he was comfortable for those 5 hours we had him. But he was super nice. I mean, we talked about movies. I didn't, it's funny. I never brought up Quentin. I think that's my biggest regret. I didn't want to bring up Quentin only because it was so obvious he was Mr. Blonde in Reservoir Dogs.
Mhm.
But a part of me is just happy I didn't, only because like he's not just known in that movie,
Mhm.
despite the world going all haywire Letterbox of like, oh, Michael Madsen passed away, like let's make him relevant again. It's weird when you know someone who has been in the indie world, but also been in like some of the biggest movies ever.
Mhm.
And Reservoir Dogs is what got his career going. It's weird when people perceive someone after when they pass away. Um, and I know he wasn't in the best state of mind when I was talking to him, but I appreciate his conversation. And remember, the last thing I said to him was, look, man, I know you're going through some things. I appreciate you telling me, and thank you for being open. Like, if you need any help, like, please let me know. Like, I'm more than willing to hand you my number, like anything, like just so you're okay. And all he said was, just tell my agent I did good. I was like, all right, sounds good. I'm happy with the interaction I had, and I'm really appreciative that I got the chance to meet him.
And you mentioned the difference between the indie and the more commercial world. In your experience, what are some of the key differences?
Well, I mean, with indies, I mean, you don't know where the hell that money's coming from.
Hmm.
I'll say that. Like part of it's crowdfunded, part of it is coming from private equity investors. That's where all the money's at. And I mean, we got to keep in mind, we got to look at the current global economy and the country's economy state right now.
Hmm.
It's really hard to finance things right now.
Hmm.
Because a lot of these government-based programs are getting cut where there's open grants and government-based grants and open inclusive opportunities for funding for all walks of life.
Hmm.
It's been becoming very difficult unless if you know that financial private equity and those more private lines of money.
Hmm.
um so like with indies, you never know where the money's coming from. Part of it's, like I said, it can come from crowdfunding, it can come from private investors. It can come from selling all your video games from childhood.
Hmm.
Like how I did, like or self-finance. I feel like as indie filmmakers, we're taking risks because we want to tell these stories and build a foundation and name for ourselves, not only with getting exposed with our shorts, but to really make a mark in this industry with feature films. And to be honest, making a dollar because we're artists, but we also want to make money.
Yes.
It's that weird hard balance that you have to think is that like you can easily crew up and make your day to day there and work the long ass hours,
Hmm.
or you can be an entrepreneur and make art and find a way to sell that art.
Hmm.
And it's funny because I'm trying to learn classes on art real estate right now.
Hmm.
Not to sidetrack, but like I went to a Venice art gallery back last February where it was like by chance. I was just trying to do coffee shop work, and I went to Monk Rock's art gallery in Venice.
Hmm.
And Monk Rock is a famous mural artist. So like mural art, like graffiti style art. But she had some crazy, crazy like canvases of just some amazing bodies of work. I was so impressed. But I didn't know much about art. She tried to get me to sell something, buy her something. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm 24 at the time. I don't really have the money to buy art.
Hmm.
Like I feel just as broke as the average college student. And then she just kind of gave me some pointers on art real estate and how, the signatures are worth the value and like the long term longevity and the long term value of art when you buy it, knowing it, it's not only a centerpiece in your living quarters, but it's also, you're investing in something that's going to be worth more value over time, especially when it's a one of a kind.
Hmm.
But I want to learn a little more into it. So I feel like with art, real estate, I translate that with film financing.
Hmm.
And, maybe if I get my master's down the line, I need to learn more of the business and I have to have better business skills as much as I'm an artist.
Hmm.
That's what I hence mean by student in the craft.
Hmm.
But with commercials, it's coming from corporate America
Hmm.
most of the time. And through that private equity and that private financing to sell a product. In short, it's really coming from corporate America. Hence why I take commercials to pay my bills because I know the money's there. But I do like it. And I want to learn more into the creative storytelling needed And it's interesting why brands like Red Bull, State Farm, Progressive, Geico, I guess we're talking about car insurance at this point, you know, is using characters with brand storytelling. And Sundance is doing something like that now because I feel like Sundance, as someone who's not bad, I feel like it's becoming corporate, and but it is an interesting open book. Aside from the narratives and the fellowships and within the institution, it's those keynote presentations of brand storytelling. So I don't know. I feel like the money floats everywhere, but those are things I'm just interested in learning aside from what I already know in the indie sphere.
And I second that, wanting to get a deeper understanding of the film or business aspect of film, because kind of like I mentioned before, film is a business. And you mentioned working with Progressive, working with Flow. Can you elaborate any more on that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I got it through a mutual connection,
Mhm,
someone who I knew, and I reached out, called, DM'd and started PA.
mhm,
And they're a very nice team. I love the team at Station Film. I love the Arnold Worldwide team. I love the Brickyard VFX team. I'm really grateful that they've given me a bunch of opportunities to work and to build hopefully a long lasting relationship and a professional relationship
mhm.
where we're not only I'm not only helping them get production done, but I'm also contributing to something bigger than myself. I think that's like the best part about the whole experience. Um, but they're very nice. Honestly, I think it's the best that I'm ever invited on because the craft is great, the team's great. Like just everything about it. Everyone is just super nice. I'm
Mhm.
just very grateful for all of them. Like they're just absolutely incredible. And I'm just grateful to continue learning under their wing and to be a part of one of the most to be a part of the longest running national ad in the United States is quite impressive.
And of course, we've been able to kind of learn about you as a filmmaker, but kind of get into you as a person. What's one thing that people might not know about you, like some fun facts?
It's so crazy. I used to child model.
Really?
Yeah, like very early on, because when I was five, oh God, I was on a Play-Doh box when I was five. And
Oh.
my mom got me involved with Boston Casting, like when I was like super, super young, only because she wanted to meet, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. so so she had me model and audition for all of these projects and do background and stuff, but mostly modeling. And I booked two jobs. It was just a bunch of auditions and stuff, like from like 2 years old to seven. So that's what I was doing before getting into film. It's funny. I hate being in front of the camera, but
Hmm.
people for some reason like casting me in their like smaller like running gun films,
Mhm.
only because it's like, well, yeah, why not? I'm just playing a crazy character, or I'm doing some obscene thing on camera. But like,
Mhm.
like I keep forgetting that's where I started,
Mhm.
like unironically,
Mhm.
aside from, playing hockey and playing sports and starting off in the sports world and then doing theater when I was in high school, when I was
Mhm.
17, 18 years old. Like I was child modeling, not acting, modeling. So I
Yeah.
just, it's funny how that comes full circle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, oh God, am I even interesting? I'll find out like what exactly I do. I mean, I like to travel. I feel like
Mhm.
the big thing for me right now is that I never had the opportunity to study abroad.
Mhm.
So part of CAN was to study abroad, quote unquote.
Mhm.
But like I said, I went to school during COVID,
Mhm.
and I did not have the opportunity to go anywhere during that time. So I feel like now as a 25-year-old, like if I'm gonna go travel, like it's to make up for that lost time. Sometimes it's so funny because I had a conversation with someone who I met at CAN
Mhm.
from the Emerging Filmmakers program.
Mhm.
And I was talking with her, and we were like, yeah, we feel like because of COVID, like we're like 5 years like mentally back, and like we're like, but also 5 years young at the same time, only
Mhm.
because we have that lost experience. So like for me, I just become like very travel centric and like
Mhm.
seeing new places, seeing new countries. And I love to have the ability to do it outside of school rather during school because of the freedom and flexibility, as long as the financial freedom and flexibility exists.
Mhm.
Um, so that's just been my big thing right now. Is just to see everything, try to hit all seven continents if I can,
Mhm.
see as many countries as possible. Like that's just, something I feel like I never get to say about myself is I want to see I want to hopefully hit all seven continents. That's a bucket list
Mm.
thing for me.
Yeah, and that'll build your experience and then build your palette as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, which is exactly what you're looking for. And it's great that
Absolutely.
at least young, you're able to realize that you didn't like being in front of the camera because that simplifies things for what you do now. And there's also a way to for me to mention a random thing I noticed. You kind of look like Jared Goff,
Oh
the
God, I thought you were gonna say I look like Josh Peck.
but no,
I
like
was.
the you
Oh
get that a
God.
lot.
That's so funny. That's a first because
Hmm.
everyone says I look like Josh Peck.
Huh.
So, I may have to join those like Josh Peck impersonation
Hmm.
contests, like on TikTok, like the Timothy Chalamet one that
Yeah,
happened
yeah.
in New York.
Hmm.
So I'm hoping if he somehow hears this, that like I am your lookalike, Josh. Like I have no shame. I will pull up
Hmm.
and send you these pictures of me dressed up in the premiere movie theater outfit. Like I was in New York and I was in a coffee shop
Hmm.
just like it was like a couple of days after Halloween,
Hmm.
and the barista was like, "Yo, you look just like Josh Peck," and I'm like, and the whole like coffee shop was like, "Oh my god, it kind of does." They all thought I was him. I was like, "No, I'm just here for my coffee," but I ended up doing an impersonation from the show for it, which is funny because I feel like I practice it like in private, and it's so spot on. But he said so funny. It was so funny because he told me to stay fly, Josh Peck. He
Hmm.
wrote Josh on my coffee, and I thought that was hilarious.
Hug me, brother. Yeah.
On me, brother. So yeah, I'm hoping to join a Josh Peck impersonation contest at some point.
It's funny. Yeah, I was able to unlock that. So yeah, you have Josh Peck and you have Jared Goff. But to kind of keep this going, I want to ask, what's one thing you love and one thing you strongly dislike, just in general?
Oh wow, in general.
Hmm.
Oh wow, that's like because I love a lot of things, I hate a lot of things.
Oh,
I'm a bit. Oh God, I gotta be so basic with this because it's so open ended. I mean, I'm a big sports guy. I'm Boston Pride, like with the Bruins, Celtics, Red Sox, Patriots. That's my big like. I mean, I like New York. I like a big city.
mhm,
I'm not a fan of my small town right now, but the idea of small town.
mhm.
I'm Italian. I'm Irish. I found I was French.
Wow.
Yeah, like I just
Living in
I
Japan.
found yeah, I was kind of surprised, but know nothing about French.
Hmm.
Or nothing about like my French ancestry, I should say.
Hmm.
You know, it's so open-ended. I feel like I love just being an open book
Hmm.
and being open and social and seeing new things and like not being afraid to try something once.
Hmm.
Um, I feel like I hate the overthinking factor of it.
Hmm.
And like, taking too long to make my decisions. I'm a very type A guy where it's like
Hmm.
I have to like have things like really like planned down, ready to go, and know the decisions I'm gonna make, and know like the alternate decisions I'll make if the first option goes wrong.
Hmm.
I feel like I gotta, planning ahead for me is important. Going unprepared. I've been unprepared in a lot of situations, but like I always beat myself up. So
Hmm.
I hate having to beat myself up for being unprepared half the time. So
Yeah.
I like to go with a plan.
But as a good producer should. And then kind of building on really everything we've talked about. What are your hopes and dreams, professional or personally?
To have get married and have kids. Nah, but that's long ago. For me, career wise, I want to have my first feature under my belt by the end of the decade.
Hmm.
That's my goal. I first feature, hopefully it's sold, produced, distributed, like all that jazz. Like
Hmm.
make my next film, but have it be a feature. I hope by, by 35, 40, like I'm at the point where I've made 3 or 4 features, before I'm 40. Like I want to continue telling stories. That to me it's just getting better at my craft.
Hmm.
But I have some benchmarks. But for me, like the one I want to obtain at this point in time is make my first feature,
Hmm.
just get it off the ground. And I feel like long term, like I hope I see myself living abroad at some point.
Hmm.
See, hopefully that happens. And just keep making movies. This is the only thing I see myself doing for the rest of my life. And I
Hmm.
want to find ways to make it happen, whether it's directing, producing, just, or a bit of both. Just being involved in the stories and the craft and just learning from other great filmmakers.
And it's good you have that goalpost to kind of chase. And then once you get that feature out, that goalpost will be moved and it'll eventually be another benchmark and for you things for you to keep chasing. But speaking of features, I want to ask you, what are some of your favorite movies and why they resonate with you?
Yeah, wow. We're getting into a lot of personal questions. Ain't that crazy? Um, I feel like for me, it's like films that I resonate with, and part of it is like when films that I've either seen recently or just like all time. I feel like for me, a comfort movie's always been Forrest Gump, just because of
Hmm.
the pop culture aspect of it. I've
Hmm.
grew up with pop culture. I wish I grew up then, but I
Yeah.
love pop culture as a whole. So
Hmm.
I feel like that, like like, and just like having it, he sees the whole world thick and thin,
Hmm.
and he sees how then it was a changing world. So like I want to, it feels with comfort that I feel like I'm working my life towards what Forrest did, and seeing the world and making big differences, even if they feel small. I also am a heartthrob for like like movies that deal with time, but also characters and dialogue, like the Before trilogy,
Hmm.
and a lot of Linklater's work. I am a big Cooper Wright fan, who did Cha Cha Real Smooth with Dakota Johnson,
Hmm.
and I don't know if I'm allowed to curse, but like
Yeah.
Blank House. So it's called Shit House, but like
Yeah.
it's yeah. But I like his sense of making movies with what you got and just trying to make it work.
Hmm.
And he's also he acts in both those movies too. But I like Cooper Wright's work. Just like it's just showing that like anything is possible even with little that you have. Making it feel grand. And he I love his work, so I look up to him a lot. And then Damien Chazelle, just like really just putting together this life of the struggling artist trilogy with
Hmm.
Whiplash, La La Land, and Babylon. I look at those three as a trilogy.
Hmm.
Like it's dealing with the struggling artist in every avenue possible, from the musician to the performer to the filmmaker.
Wow.
And I know people hate on Babylon, but if you really think about it, with that time period piece, like, he exemplifies the life of a struggling artist in all three of those films.
Hmm.
And how all of them are looking to chase success and be the greatest, and knowing that there are a lot of their wants, hopes, and dreams meet a lot of sacrifice, whether that's with people or places they want to be at, or things that they have to let go, whether in or out of their control. So I like a lot of movies that deal with those translations, as much as the other person, at least off the top of my head. But that I like movies that resonate with me with pop culture, even like Kevin Smith. Like I'm a big Kevin Smith fan. You know, I like Kevin Smith more than I like Marvel,
Hmm.
only because of the world building aspect. Like, he is the original Marvel Cinematic Universe director.
Hmm.
If you really think about it, because he's a comic book guy,
Hmm.
and he's building his own universe within New Jersey, and working with what he has. With like Mallrats and Jay and Silent Bob and Clerks, and Chasing Amy. Like just a lot of small town characters, and you feel that whole universe expanding in each of his films. And I've worked with him personally, and he's a great guy.
Hmm.
So I'm really fond of his work. I really look up to him.
So you mentioned working with Kevin Smith. Can you tell us about that experience?
It's crazy. It was awesome. It was part of Lost Weekend's tour. So like I haven't worked on a film of his per se,
Hmm.
but I've had the opportunity to screen at his festival, at
Hmm.
Kevin Smith's Mod Castle Film Festival in Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey. And that was one of our earliest acceptances too.
Hmm.
Like I didn't realize that he was like creating a platform for indie filmmakers, like how he got his start in the 90s,
Hmm.
for people to, get their films screened by Kevin, and winners of it would get produced. Like win at his festival, like him creating an outlet for filmmakers to get their work seen,
Hmm.
and Kevin Smith being the front and eyes of it.
Hmm.
So the fact that we not only got accepted into the festival, but we got nominated for best short film was insane. And yeah, like he's super nice. Ernie, who runs the festival and also is like his right hand man, like he's super dope, and like everyone on the Smod Castle team. So it's funny running into Kevin on the streets of Cannes, because
Hmm.
I ran into him while we were like going from like, like bar to bar, we were eating food, with like our program, just, out and about in the nightlife. And then Kevin was with his family, but like I ran into him and he recognized me. He was like, "Oh my God, wait, you look so familiar." I'm like, "Yeah, my film screened at your festival." He was like, "Wow, no way." Like, let's take a selfie for Ernie. And he just pulled out his phone. I was like, "Oh shoot. Okay. I just want to say thank you." Cause like, I don't know if you would remember me. It was like, no, it was like a pick up where we left off conversation, which was so funny. So yeah, he's super nice. I'm just so grateful just for him to just accepting my film
Hmm.
and give me more, like he's super down to earth, he's a great storyteller, filmmaker, and I really look up to him as an artist. So it's really nice to see your work get appreciated by like one of your heroes.
And it's great that it was able to come full circle like that. Like you be going to this festival in New Jersey, meeting up in Cannes, kind of like what we did, meeting at Cannes, and then meeting up here on the Zicast. So thank you so much for your time, Charlie.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Ryan. It was super fun. And hopefully, if anyone's interested in learning more and you want to collab, my Instagram is _Charlie Norton. And you can find my work at www.flyingcardcardproductions.com.
Thank you so much for your time, for sharing all these awesome experiences in film, and being a cool role model for people post grad like myself that mentioned post grad again about how to stay creative, to find your work, and be able to network with other filmmakers and really build your career in this very interesting time for the industry. So thank you so much again, Charlie.
Of course. Thank you so much.
And as always, this is Ryan Ziaks with the Zicast, where everyone has a story, signing off. Thank you so much for watching.